All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is I think the third installment this year of our Innovation for Impact series. Today we're going to talk about succession and sustainability. My name is Lawrence Heiner. I'm the Director of Training and Technical Assistance here at Cal Kappa. Today I've also got David Knight, who's our Executive Director. I'd like to say a few words.
Yeah, just want to first thank you to the guests joining us to bring us this information today. Really excited to listen in and hear each one of your stories. And also thanks to our other state associations that shared your information and let us know that you guys had a great story to tell. So we're always really appreciative of our partners across the country. So thanks for being here. Thanks for everybody else being on. We look forward to the opportunity to hear today and look forward to what we can learn. So thanks, Lawrence.
All right, thanks, David. And today with me, I've got a special panel of folks who know an awful lot about succession and how that relates to sustainability, and very different angles to approach from different agency paths, different situations. So hopefully you'll find something that rhymes with your agency here. And if not, take down some good tips on succession as it relates to not just your executive director succession, but looking at succession in the organization and how that relates to its success. So thank you, panelists, for being here. I'm going to allow the panelists to present themselves just to provide us with a little bit of background about their expertise, and then we'll look into their stories on succession and how that related to their situation. So today, just as a list, we've got Heather Loftman joining us, Michelle Moorhead, and Michael Tubbs. For our California folks, it's not that Michael Tubbs, okay? And I'll let him introduce himself here in just a moment. Heather, would you like to get us kicked off?
Sure. My name is Heather Lockman. I am the CEO at Community Action Partnership of Lancaster and Saunders counties. We're based in Lincoln, Nebraska. So we serve a 2-county area in southeast Nebraska. I recently, well, it'll be 3 years in October, came into my current role after serving in another director role within the organization for 10 years. So 13 years total with the organization, and had the opportunity to take over when my predecessor retired in 2021. So I look forward to sharing a little bit more, Lawrence, is that right? In a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Heather.
Okay.
Michelle.
Hi, my name is Michelle Moorhead, and I am the Executive Director for Community Services of Northeast Texas. I am based in a little tiny town called Linden, Texas. We serve 19 total counties in Texas and the northeast part of Texas. And I've been in this role for a year, but I've been in community action for 18 years.
Thanks, Michelle. And Michael.
Thanks, Lawrence. I'm happily unemployed. Been retired for 5 years from a 13-year experience leading the Community Action Partnership in North Alabama for 13 years. Prior to that, 30 years with the Southern Company, an energy company. So, and also spent 3 or 4 years serving as the Community Action Association Director out of the Birmingham office, leading 23 agencies in the state of Alabama. So my experience, about 18 years with Community Action Association, and directly leading the Community Action Agency. Then I retired in 2018. I haven't forgot everything that I knew back in 2018, so I'll try to add some value to the conversation today.
All right, thank you, Michael. Okay, so I think we can go in the order that we introduced ourselves to hear a little bit more about your succession story. And each of the directors that we have on the call today have a different approach to how succession has interacted with their lives and how their agencies took an approach and how they navigated that. So Heather, what happened with your entrance into your role, and how does that relate to succession at your agency?
Yeah, so it's such an interesting story. I I have to say, 5 years ago, I never thought that I would be sitting here in this position. And actually, immediately prior to deciding to apply for the role, go for the role, I didn't think I was going to find myself here, but here I am. So, so just a little bit of context, a little bit of background. I started at my organization as a grant writer immediately out of graduate school. And, pretty quickly fell in love with the work, had the opportunity to see the difference, something that I could make in the community. So fell in love with it, and throughout the years had the opportunity to move up into the development and communications director role, and absolutely just loved my boss. My predecessor was such an amazing mentor to me. And for some reason, I had this notion that she was never going to retire. She was never going to leave. And thus I, decided I'm not going to leave either, because we work really, really well together. And, lo and behold, 2021, as many leaders did at the time, she decided it's time for me to retire after having to lead the organization through a pandemic and all those sorts of things, and other things too. So, when she announced her retirement, there really wasn't a clear plan for succession. We did have a board approved succession plan, which basically it's pretty simple. And we still have a version of it today, but it named someone who would act in an interim capacity during a time where they were searching for the long-term replacement. But really that the process would be that the board would convene a search committee to find the long-term replacement. So she retired with about 4 months notice. She wanted it to be quicker, but and we thought that was pretty quick. She had been there for 13 years. One of the unique things about our situation was that, the person who was named in the succession plan for the interim replacement didn't necessarily have the strongest rapport with other directors, which was a little bit of a challenge and kind of created a little bit of fear. I didn't really see, I didn't think about it. I have sort of the imposter syndrome stuff going on. And until people started sort of coming up to me and saying, hey, are you gonna go for the role? And I didn't decide until maybe 2 months into their search process that I was gonna go for it. So leading up to that decision, I had been in a director role, and we had all the directors, all the division leaders, the program directors had all put together continuity plans. So for basically planning continuity for if they were to leave, or if something were to happen to them or to me in that case, in a short-term unexpected situation or a longer-term expected situation. And it was essentially this template that we all kind of created, and we had to, set our plans. And our boss did that too, our executive director. So that was helpful. And she ended up, my predecessor ended up putting together that plan too, which was really, really helpful to me as I got into the position. But I wouldn't say necessarily that we had a really robust process for the transition. We had certain things in place, but I've seen organizations, plan for their CEO's retirement 1 year, 2 years in advance, and this one kind of came out of left field. So So she decided to when I found out that I got the position, it was basically 2 weeks of time with she and I, and she transitioned out, I transitioned in. But what really helped me is that I had a lot of that institutional knowledge, which was really helpful. And then that continuity plan that she had developed really helped me in just figuring out her day to day, where to find certain things. And the process that we used was she and one of our board members actually went through, it was called a Successful Transitions course. And the process that we implemented from that was one of our board members, when we were creating those continuity plans, actually met with each of the directors and asked us questions about, our roles and our day-to-day, and helped to develop those plans. So my predecessor did the same thing with this board member, and it was all written down. It was all, everything was organized really nicely. And I had to figure a lot of things out, but it was nice to have that outline to figure out just where things lived and what to do and how to prepare for board meetings and all those sorts of things. So it ended up working out. I don't know that she could have left as quickly as she did if someone from the outside were coming in, because there was, again, a lot of institutional knowledge that I had as an internal sort of promotion. But that's essentially the story. That was a little bit rambling, but happy to ask questions or answer questions after everyone gets through.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. And feel free to post questions in chat. We can kind of eyeball those as we go. If you've got something that comes to mind while the speakers are speaking. Michelle, if you feel good to go, we'll have you go up next.
Well, my story is a lot different than Heather's. So, except for I did grow up in community action. So I started 18 years ago in a Head Start classroom as a temporary teacher's assistant. And I moved up in Head Start as far as I could move up. And then I decided I wanted to go over to the community services division to learn what they were doing over there. And I learned everything from case manager all the way up to executive director just by spending time with my supervisors and the executive director. They would say, "Hey, Michelle, do you want to do this?" And it was pretty much, I really don't want to do this, Michelle, but if you will, then come on. So, and I don't think, I probably really wasn't that they didn't want to, they probably just didn't have time. And so I would take any chance that I could to gain more knowledge. So I was at the same agency for 14 years, and then an opportunity to become a deputy director came up here at the agency where I am now at CS&T. And so I applied and got the position. So there was a plan in place to hire a deputy director and all of those things. But 5 months after I was hired, my executive director had a heart attack. He came back to work a few months after, but he wasn't okay. Okay. He just was not in a place where he could really make all the plans that were needed. And so he would come into work maybe once or twice a week. And I would try to get time with him, and he gave me all the time that he could with everything else he had to do. So I ended up succession planning on my own, which did not go very well at first. I had no idea what I was doing in regards to succession planning. So I got the board together. They didn't know, they had never done it either. And so finally I just wrote down everything that I thought I knew and everything that I thought I needed to know about the agency. And went through those questions over the phone with my previous executive director. And we did the best we could. The first succession plan was missing some things, and I didn't figure that out until I applied for the executive director position, and it wasn't an immediate interim executive director. The deputy didn't immediately go to interim, which is something. So what happened is the Head Start director and community services director were supposed to be leading the agency while the executive director was gone. I'm going back because I forgot that part. So, but here I am, the deputy director, and we didn't have a community services director. We had a Head Start director, but she said, "Michelle, I'm not doing that. I didn't even know I was on that plan." So I said, "Okay, I'll do it." I'll do it. And we ended up, after many attempts, it took us about 3 or 4 attempts. We finally came up with a good succession plan that works. And if I were to drop off the face of the earth right now, everybody knows what they need to do at this point.
Thanks, Michelle. And now it seems like you're settled into place and you know what's next for your group. Michael, tell us about your story.
Well, Heather and Michelle have been through the war, so good for them, and I wish you great success. Thanks, Lawrence. When I think back to the transition I actually went through in 2005, the director that I succeeded had stayed a little bit too long, and the board was in disarray. The agency was divided. They'd lost their place in the community, so it was an uphill climb. And I thought in 2005, if I left, I wanted to leave the agency in a little bit better shape than I found it. What I've observed over the 18 years of my involvement in community action is a lot of CEOs, a lot of executive directors, whatever you call them, stay too long. And they hang on to their agency as if they're irreplaceable, and none of us are. And as I neared my federal retirement age of 67 in 2018, actually a year and a half out, I made a decision and talked to the board, talked to the HR director, talked to my executive assistant, and I said, I'm going to retire on October 1st, 2018. And it was a year and a half out. And they weren't surprised. They were just surprised that I had thrown it out there, that I had a year and a half to go. But I had made a commitment that I wanted to leave the agency in good shape. And to do that, I felt like we needed 18 months. We were a very large agency covering a very large geographic profile, had taken on a lot of new business units. We had some for-profit business units, and we were not just I hate to say it, a normal community action agency. We were very progressive, and I had come to the agency in 2005 from a for-profit background, and the board wanted to grow the agency in that direction. So at the 18-month mark, it seemed like a little early. A lot of people were kind of surprised. Oh, we don't need 18 months. But when I look back on it, we really needed 18 months. And that 18 months was planned out in 6-month intervals, 6 months preparing the agency and the job description and kind of looking forward to the future, not looking back, trying to shape the leadership role so that it would be ready for the agency in the future. And I remember telling the HR director, once we shaped up the job description, I probably couldn't have gotten the job, because we had pushed up on it so hard. And we wanted to make it a 21st century job with a 21st century business mindset, not just a nonprofit or community action mindset. And so doing that, we reached large kind of an outside perspective. We advertised nationally. We felt like the agency needed to try to find the best leader that they could. So we spent 6 months working hard at trying to saturate the community action world. We did allow internal people to show interest in the job. We weren't banning them from doing that, but we kind of felt like the next director would come outside in. The last 6 months were really refining that process, getting it down to 6 candidates. and going through the interview process. We interviewed people on the phone, Zoom call for familiarity, and then narrowed it down to 6 candidates who appeared in person to a very select search committee, which was made up of board members and leadership team, HR director, and others. I was not on that selection committee. I made a decision that I would not choose my successor, not be accused of choosing my successor. And so I backed away from that, although I was involved all along the way. I wanted to be sure that the process brought to the surface the best candidate. And so I'll say I took a half step away from the process, but still was engaged, adding value as I could. And I cared so much about the agency. I wanted to get the best leader they could. And the process, I think, flushed that to the surface, and the selection was made. And I was able to spend 1 month with the new CEO and handed off the agency. And I felt like the agency was ready for that. I was ready to retire. The new director came outside the company and had nonprofit experience, had very strong credentials, and has stepped into the role. And I think over the last 5 years has done a very, very good job. So when I think about it, I wanted to be sure that the 18-month process worked. And looking back on it, I'll say that it did. We had all the same things that CSBG requires, the succession plans and things like that. We could have managed the agency in a crisis if I had come up missing and not been able to make it back to work one day. The agency wouldn't have failed. We had a plan to do all that. But CSBG only deals with those kind of things. It only wants to make sure that the agency functions and can do what it necessarily does to manage grants. What I wanted to do is make sure that we had a leader in place that could lead the agency and lead the people. And that's what we delivered.
All right. Great. Thank you. Okay. And we've got a mix of folks that are joining us today in terms of what they do in their organizations and what their organizations are. So if you've got questions for our panelists based on your experience or any activities that your agency might be going through, now's a good time to ask questions of our panelists. And I can start us out here a little bit. And this was kind of an open question, so anybody can jump in. Are there any tools that you're using today that may help in deciding or developing succession plans for your agency right now? Are you using anything currently that you find advantageous to prepare or to maintain sustainability in the agency? That could be for your position or other positions within the organization.
I'll jump in. I mentioned those continuity plan templates. Those are, the last time we did update them was a couple years ago, but it's time to update them again because there's been some transition in leaderships in the various departments and programs. So they're living documents and just kind of keep everything up to date in terms of where things can be found and what the current leaders thinking is in terms of what resources might be called upon, whether it's an internal person or outside resources and those types of things. What else was I going to say? There's a lot of just, one of the things I noticed when I came into the role was just how many things live inside people's brains, just like the day-to-day, how to do payroll, how to create these various HR functions. So one of the things I tasked with my division leaders with is really, thinking about those processes that live inside their heads and writing them down and putting them in some sort of guide. We had some of those things established too. For example, there's a crisis communication plan that's really helpful in terms of guiding someone through a process if there was to be a crisis, who to inform, how to inform, that sort of thing. But really getting those things on paper and really ensuring that our every director, every division leader, every program leader is sharing those processes, that knowledge with others on their team as well. So.
Awesome. Javier?
Hey, Lawrence. First of all, thank you so much for having me. My name's Javier. I have been with the organization a year now this week. So my role is I'm the HR manager, but Heather, you're absolutely right. I think that some of those standard operating procedures is something that we're really working towards so that we can all kind of sit at someone's desk and know exactly how to do something. That's something that we're definitely moving towards having. And then also something that we're using as far as succession planning is 9Box. I don't know if any of you have been familiar with 9Box, but it standardizes how we look at talent, especially how we grow talent from within. So that's something that we're utilizing at the moment.
Awesome. Thank you, Javier. Okay. Michelle.
I was just listening to some of the challenges that you talked about as far as when you have a veteran CEO or veteran leader in a position and it's time for them to leave. Trying to figure out just maybe some tips on, I'm on a board with a director that's been on the board a long time, and the board keeps talking about succession plan, but he's very hesitant to give us one specifically. And his argument is always, he does a lot of advocacy at the Sacramento level. And his argument is always no one can do what I do. And so our feedback to him is, we know, but when you leave, that's not going to help us. So any tips on kind of, trying to respect them at the same time, that it's time for them to leave and, they're not really cooperating like they need to on the succession plan.
Hey, Michelle, this is Michael Tubbs. I mentioned that, the director I followed really stayed at the agency probably a couple of years too long. And that's the role for the board of directors. The board of directors they just absolutely have to be leading the agency through those kind of transitions. And, somebody just needs to have a straight up conversation and talk about, it's about the agency. It's not about the individual. And, I tell people, the worst thing that you can have as a leader of an agency is somebody come up to you and say, have you ever thought about retiring? And, I wanted to be sure that didn't happen. And the director that I had before me was a great guy and a good friend, but he stayed at the agency 3 or 4 years too long. And as a result, the agency actually went into decline. And he had been with Community Action 45 years. He was one of those legacy directors that came out of the mid 60s. So, he loved Community Action. He loved the work, and that's great. But what I would do is find a way to transition them into a role that adds value, but doesn't hinder the leadership of the agency. And somebody has to have that one-on-one conversation with them and just man up about it and talk about how they can add value in the community, how they can add value to the agency, but not hinder the success of the agency going forward. And that takes somebody with vision, takes somebody with a role, and I would say a board chair type role, and to make sure that they can let them add value, but not let them hinder the growth and the future of the agency. That's hard. And I'm not telling you it's easy, but too many legacy directors have held up the future of Community Action in too many communities. And I've seen them actually go into decline, and some of them actually go away because those directors would not get out of the way and let younger leaders come in and lead them with a new vision.
Thanks.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, thanks, Lawrence. prior to me, to coming to Cal Kappa as a director here, I served as an executive director in Arkansas at the ripe old age of 29 years old, and it was a somewhat of an unplanned departure. So I did learn the hard way things I wish I would have known when I took over. We had a series last year here with a lot of our executive directors, including I see Mary Alice is on, and appreciate you being on, Mary Alice. She also serves as the chair of our board of directors here for Cal Kappa. So thanks for being here. And we talk a lot about that one glaring thing that you need to make sure is on that plan. Would each of you kind of just give me an idea of what you would say? These are the things that I want to make sure that gets transitioned from leadership or from the previous CEO to the next CEO. That would be just glaring to say, these are things that you need to have on your plan. That I wish I would have known when I started, or I did get taught when I was started. It was very valuable. So I'll just leave it at that.
Well, Lawrence, and thanks, David. I knew you were not from California with that accent, so that sounded like an Arkansas guy. But I had sent Lawrence a list of 50 things I wish I'd known when I was the CEO of the agency back in 2005, and those were what I'd call accumulated wisdom over the years. And they're just things that I wrote down that I thought would be helpful to a new CEO, new executive director in a community action agency. And they're not timeless, and they're just observations that I had. But if those 50 things would be helpful, then I shared them with my successor, and hope that they were helped him get up on the learning curve a little quicker than it was for me, because I came from a for-profit background, coming into the nonprofit world, had never managed federal grants, had never managed 450 people. So it was a learning curve for me that was quite interesting. It took me probably 3 years to understand the financials of a community action agency, and in a dysfunctional board. So you can imagine it was quite the learning curve. So if those 50 things are helpful, then if there's 10 of them that are helpful out of those 50, then maybe it would help some of the CEOs who are transitioning into that role get up on the learning curve and be able to add value a little bit quicker. If they're helpful, then so be it. One thing I didn't mention is I'm just real keen on the whole issue of effective leadership, no matter what the business unit. And I've grown a lot, learned a lot in 47 years of working. It's all about leadership, and leadership transfers. It's nonprofit, for-profit, doesn't really matter. Size of the company, small, medium, or large, it doesn't matter. Geography, doesn't matter any of those factors. But I really focused on growing leaders within the agency so that the CEO could actually function better. The CEO is just that. They don't have to be a program director. I never served one client. I never taught in a classroom. I never weatherized a house. I didn't deliver one meal. Well, actually, I did deliver some Meals on Wheels, but that wasn't my job. CEO is to do that, and that is to oversee the company. But if they're not a good leader, they can just mess it up for everybody. So leadership transfers, and leadership is the key to me to the whole thing. And to me, that was what the board asked me to do, and I try to do that. But those 50 things are out there. I think Lawrence has shared them, and some of them are humorous, but if they're helpful, so be it.
Thanks, Mike.
This may be more just specific to my situation, but one of the things I really kind of reflected on after I stepped into this role was I prepared for it. Heck no. No. And I'm still learning every day what kind of leader I am. And, for a long, I mentioned that I held my predecessor in very, very high regard. I really realized after stepping into this role that I am a very different leader than her. I knew that. And so I had to figure out what that sort of meant for me, and sort of let go of this idea of leadership that I held in high regard based on how she led. And that's okay. You know, so I think just being cognizant of that and really looking within too, and finding your own way to lead. And it doesn't necessarily have to be this certain way that you really admired in someone else. So.
Cool, thank you. Michelle Moorhead, what do you think? What were some of the top things you needed to know or that you would recommend transitioning a new leader in?
Well, I pretty much the same. Well, one of the same things that Heather said is I'm never going to be like the previous leader here. And whether it's good or bad, that's just not who I am. One thing that I had to learn though is that I can't be as sweet as I was before. I mean, I can be sweet, but not a pushover. Our organization has a culture of complacency, and that has been our hardest thing. So in the last year, that's the hardest thing for us to conquer. And we still have some people that are complacent and they just have they've dug their heels in, and they're being held accountable, and they don't want to be held accountable. That, as an executive director, that probably has been the hardest thing that we've gone through in this last year.
Well, the follow-up question to that, and I'll step out of the way, is, you know, a big part, besides learning that a clean audit needs to happen, you know, the direct things. And I saw that on Michael's list, and I laughed because I did not have a clean audit when I took over. But, you know, one of the things when I went back to Mississippi and was able to serve in a deputy role, we had a great executive director at the time that was really, really great in building trust throughout the community. So a big part of being in a CEO or an executive role is you're the outward facing person to the community. So can anybody share kind of part of that process in the first 6 months and the first year, how you begin to build that trust in the community? Because you're leading a lot, you know, you're organizing a lot of funds and a lot of dollars, and it's sounding, for most of you guys, it's not all just one mayor or one one elected official. It's multiple with all different opinions. So can y'all share, you know, that process in your onboarding and in your transition of how you built that trust for yourself, or the person after you, or the person before, or how you got that from the person before you?
For us at CSNT, we had a horrible reputation. Our executive director stayed too long too. And what I've been doing over the last year is I've been building that reputation and building trust by doing what I say I'm going to do. If I tell employees, clients, vendors, community partners that I'm going to do something, I make sure it's done. We've been having events in different counties, and I'm there. I'm there so that people will see my face and they know that this agency is not the same as it used to be.
Good. Well done.
I can pop in. I knew that relationship building that's another thing too. It's knowing where you're going to add the most value to the organization, right? And I knew that one of my strong suits is building relationships and being that face in the community. And so, but it takes time and intentionality to do that, especially, you know, I kind of came into a structure where the CEO was acting very much as the COO and managing programs. And I knew that needed to change. So I shifted that pretty quickly. But I actually, I created sort of a community relationship building plan. And I kind of went by sector, you know, faith-based sector, private sector, public sector, funders. And I made a list of who I wanted to prioritize with, meeting with one-on-one in each one of those categories. And I just reached out to every single one of those people and just scheduled coffee. And built some really, really strong relationships in that first year of me being in the job. And many of them I did know from my previous role too, so it made it a little bit easier. But and really just asking for advice, and asking for feedback about what we could do better as a partner, and learning from them too. And then the other thing that I really thought was very important in that first year was to establish some dedicated time to just sit down with staff across the agency. We're kind of a mid-sized agency, I'd say, 180 staff, but we're spread across many locations, and a lot of our staff are Head Start teachers, and there's not really a great opportunity for them to, spend time out of ratio. So really going to them and spending some dedicated time just chatting and getting to know and building those relationships. So for me, it had to be a plan. I am a plan person, and it had to be very intentional. And I focused on, all right, I'm gonna, focus on partner agencies during this several month period, and then I'm going to focus on funders. So it was kind of structured and broken out, and there were some really great partnerships that were built out of that simple just meeting for coffee too. So
Hey, Lawrence, this is Michael. I'll say one of the things I did pretty quick was to get involved with civic organizations. I became a member of Rotary Club. Introduced me to about 450 leaders in the community. It was absolutely invaluable. They had no idea who we were, what we did. And so I was able to give a presentation there, and it opened the door to new board members. Believe it or not, I had a bank president come to me and say, after the presentation I made to Rotary, I want to be a part of your board. It was just stunning. And it was a key moment, I think, in the history of the agency, because we began to grow the board by becoming involved in the community. And the second thing is we became very involved in the Chamber of Commerce. And people really miss this point. It is in every area we served, we became a member of the Chamber of Commerce, and it made us known. It made us known to the community, and it gave us an opportunity, gave us a voice. And a lot of community action agencies miss that point because they're a nonprofit. They kind of miss the point that being a part of the Chamber of Commerce gets your name out there. It gets you visibility. It gets you involved with business leaders, decision makers, political folks, and that was a key for us. And we became known in the community. We became a resource. We actually had a large training room that people began to use. We had United Way in there. We had training center. It became a training center for the community. And so we became a resource. And of course, when they got there, I always welcomed them and talked about our agency and made sure that they knew who we were, what we did, and why we did it. And it really grew on that. And as a result, I think the agency grew in its stature. We had a better board because of that, a better quality board especially from the private sector. And for us, it was a growth opportunity, but also one of those things that kind of changed the dynamic in the communities where we served. And we were in a large area in North Alabama, a very large geography, but we got out and we made ourselves known. And because of that, we were welcomed. And I'd say the agency is still welcome there. They're looked at as one of the largest nonprofits, but also the strongest nonprofit in North Alabama. And I think that came by hard work and by building those relationships.
Well, one thing I want to add too, in talking about building relationships, I learned also, I came from programs, so I was in WIA, it was called then, I guess, and then moved in as a CSPG director for a while, and then again got recruited to the new agency as an executive director. And one of the things we always talk about is board of directors relationships with your board as the executive. And of course, we always love the board as a beginning because we think they're the smartest because they hired us. But in reality, we can't keep the same board of directors forever, right? They change. So Can you guys give us any thoughts on how you're doing that in the process, how you're looking towards that? Because again, I think, Mary Alice is the smartest person here in the room. That's because she hired me. So, but that board's going to change. And even in association where I'm at now, our board is in the midst of that as board members change. How do you keep those relationships strong and build for the future? Because at some point, board members are going to change. Michelle,
I'll jump in.
Go ahead.
It's okay. This is Mike. One thing we did 3 years into the agency, we had a very dysfunctional and difficult board chair. We went through a major transition. We lost 9 of our 18 members overnight. And because of that, we had to rebuild the board, but it really opened up the agency. And one thing we did, my executive assistant and I came up with the idea of adding advisors to the board. We had an 18-member board. It was a tripartite board, legal as it should be, to the counties that we served, which was 3 counties in North Alabama, our core CSBG counties. But when we added advisors to the board, we ended up building what I call a board bench. We brought people onto the advisory role, which were unlimited in number. And we had financial people, we had educators, we had different folks, and they learned about the agency. They could serve on committee. They could not vote in a board meeting. They ended up many of them becoming board members. And we established 5-year term limits. But the 5-year term limit meant that if you served in the community sector, it didn't mean that you couldn't serve in another sector. So you actually could serve up to 10 years if the board allowed, which what that did, it provided us an opportunity that at 5 years, if some people were timed out, they needed to be off the board. And we had some folks who needed to retire as board members. We celebrated that and they exited. But what it did is it allowed us to keep the board fresh. We brought people onto that advisory role. They learned about the financials of the agency. They learned about the programs, the nuances of the agency. And as a result, they were as involved as any board member. And by the time they stepped into the role, they had 3 or 4 years of experience of being in a board meeting, understanding the agency. It was the single best thing that I think we accomplished in the 13 years I was at the agency. And that is growing the board through that advisory role. And I think it's the best practice. And I've tried to convince people of this. It's a wonderful gift to the agency. Establishing term limits was the secondary part of that. And that in itself kept the board fresh. And, we had board members, we had people in the community who wanted to serve on our board because they knew that they would only have to serve 5 years. They didn't have to serve for life. And as a result, I think the agency was much more healthy. And we had just a tremendous number of people come through the agency from all sectors of the community, private community, nonprofit area, from the local area, the representatives of the low-income community. And they became some of our best board members. And they grew with the agency, and the agency grew because of it.
I don't have a ton to add, but we too have sort of board committees in which folks don't have to be voting members of the board to serve on committees. So, and we do recruitment all year, and I'm meeting with folks who express interest in serving on the board constantly. So if we don't have openings at the minute, at the time, I am asking them if they have interest in serving in other ways, or if they have interest in just, keeping them on sort of a list in case there are opportunities that come up. So if there are openings, our governance and nominating committee can look at those prospects and talk to me about, my interactions with them and, make decisions from there. We also have, of course, we have our Head Start Policy Council. We have a sort of housing advisory board. We also have an advisory board to our gathering place, which is a soup kitchen. So there's a lot of other sort of pools to kind of select from when there are openings. But yeah, board recruitment happens all the time. We also have term limits, so folks can serve up to 5 consecutive 2-year terms. But again, they don't have to do the whole, until they term off the board. So, yeah.
Board membership has been a struggle. There were we were supposed to have 12 board members when I first got here, and we only had 6. So I have struggled, and what I've done is I've built relationships in all of the communities that we serve. I have built relationships, and I ask, can you help us? Will you help us? Most of the time the answer is no. And then we have to move on from there. Right now we have one board member vacancy because, we lost somebody, and we've had that vacancy for about 30 days at this point. So I'm struggling with board members because where we have our board meetings is not, it's on one side of our service area. And I think if we moved them to the middle of our service area, we would probably have more board participation.
Thanks, Michelle. And thank you to all of our panelists today. Really appreciate coming and spending some time with us and giving us your insight in such a variety of different backgrounds, all sorts of techniques and tools and strategies around succession, and taking that to another level. And thank you all for participating today, asking some great questions of our panelists. Really appreciate that as well. I've dropped a link in the chat for our session feedback. And we've got a couple of minutes left as you're doing that. Are there any final questions for our panelists while we have them on the call today? Ooh, they're letting you off easy. All right. Well, thank you very much again. Really appreciate your being here. And thank you everybody for participating. We'll see everybody at the next one.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thanks, everyone.
Wish you great success.
Thank you, Michael.